Crisis Control, brought to you by Zirilio. Cybersecurity experts protecting Australian businesses and organisations so we can all be safer together.
Hello and welcome, I'm Amber Sherlock. On today's episode of Crisis Control, we'll examine Australia's looming cyberattack. Experts say it's not a matter of if, but when. So which companies and agencies are in the crosshairs and what's really at risk for business and investors? But first, let's set the scene.
Money, data, reputation. Cybercriminals are targeting what matters most to Australian businesses. And it's not child's play. Cybercriminals are increasingly sophisticated and malicious.
They're distributed, they're all around the world, and they are highly sophisticated in terms of being able to cover their tracks.
Large or small, public or private, businesses require specific strategies to defend themselves against cybersecurity threats, and a response plan in the event of a cyber crisis.
By the time we find out they exist, obviously we want to work very quickly to close up the hole, but it's incredibly difficult to do because in many cases they've already exfiltrated a lot of data and stolen a lot of information.
However, many still underestimate the risk.
So a cyber attack can be really devastating to a business. In addition to disrupting the day-to-day operations, there can be long-term financial damage. Many businesses are not able to withstand the long-term fallout from a cyber attack. There's reputational risk, there's brand damage, loss of customers, loss of business operations, and oftentimes there's actually a financial payout if it's a ransomware style attack.
And it's not just businesses at risk. Cyber criminals are targeting public institutions, schools, hospitals and infrastructure. No entity is immune.
So this is very different from what we are sort of used to in Mission Impossible movies or something like that, where you've got government agents from one country trying to steal secrets from another country. It's not that. These are actually military-grade hackers who are going after soft targets, hospitals, university systems, but not necessarily banks. They're going after businesses that are maybe not as hardened against cyber attacks.
The Australian Cybersecurity Centre reports malicious cyber activity against Australia's national and economic interests is increasing in frequency, scale and sophistication.
They're doing that for two big reasons. One is to create chaos and disruption, but two is to actually steal money. I mean, they're literally using a lot of this cyber crime to fund weapons programs.
So are businesses listening? Are they prepared? The Australian Cybersecurity Centre says yes and no. The vast majority know cybersecurity is important to their business, but few are adequately protecting against cyber threats, nor do they have a response plan in place.
Well, we know the average cost of a data breach is $2.82 million per attack. So it's non-trivial, it's a massive, massive problem.
To discuss this today, I welcome Richard Bergman, EY Cybersecurity Lead Partner, and Mohan Koo, Chief Technology Officer of DTEX Systems. Welcome to the program, both of you. Let's go first to you, Richard. Over the past 5 years, we've seen the frequency and severity of cyber attacks increase across Australia. Why is this happening?
Yeah, this trend is actually consistent globally. So globally, we've seen the rate and impact of cyber attacks continue to increase. In Australia, this is actually impacting all sectors, whether it's critical infrastructure, government, large enterprises or small to medium businesses. The rate of successful cyber attacks in Australia is about 1 every 8 minutes. And we know it's sort of costing the national economy about $33 billion. So there's two kind of main drivers for this. We know geopolitical and trade tensions or global economic outlook actually increases the rate of cyber attacks. But we also know the success that ransomware gangs are having in getting ransoms paid is fueling these cyber attacks. It's a for-profit industry. They're making billions of dollars. They're going to keep doing it.
How well prepared are Australian organisations for cyber attacks?
Yeah, I think this is a complex and challenging issue to deal with. So many organisations are struggling. I'd say there's three drivers for that. The velocity of the threat landscape, i.e. how fast the bad guys are adopting new technology, whether that's AI or machine learning, is actually quicker than an organisation can execute on its cyber defences to help prevent itself. Secondly, we know there's a massive skills shortage. So organisations are struggling to attract, retain, the talent they need to fight cybercrime in a coordinated way. And thirdly, we know there's been a significant underinvestment in cybersecurity and a significant technical debt that's actually just making the problem harder.
Mohan, let's bring you in here. We talk a lot about technical firewalls. What about human firewalls? How important is it, and how do we teach it?
Yeah, absolutely, Amber. So the big challenge that has exacerbated the problem in cybersecurity for any kind of organisation out there, whether it be government or large or small enterprise, is the fact that everybody's now working from very different places, right? Everyone's working from home or working from the coffee shop or wherever they happen to be at this point in time. And that's, most organizations, most employees. And so, that firewall and that ability to protect the perimeter and put our arms around a network is no longer there. And so actually training our humans to be that firewall is actually the new challenge in cybersecurity. So we're spending a lot of time trying to help educate and drive a closer relationship between employers and employees so that everybody feels like they're trusted, protected, respected, and valued as an employee, no matter what role they have, so that they then can engage with the business in such a way that they become that human sensor for bad things happening, or change their behavior to de-risk the business in general. And that's a big focus for the industry right now.
And we're not talking just about individual companies by themselves. There's also a supply chain risk, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a huge area of concern, particularly in Australia. So, for those of you that are aware, most of Australia is run by small and medium enterprises. So even, serving the big four banks or, big defense organizations, it's supported by a supply chain network of many, many thousands of small, medium companies, from everything from one employee to 200 employees. And those are the organizations that are quite vulnerable because they don't have the budgets to spend on cybersecurity. They don't have the know-how. They don't have internal expertise. And as Richard said, even if you've got the budget to hire people, they're hard to find, right? So alleviating that problem, right across the country is a big challenge for all of us right now, and something that only true collaboration can solve, because it's not the problem that government can solve. It's industry, government, and academia coming together to solve that problem together holistically.
Yeah, it is a bit about mindset, isn't it? Like it's not a matter of if, but when companies will experience a cyber attack. How important is it having the right mindset and understanding the potential threat?
It's hugely important. And so one of the things that we've been really focused on in our industry is educating from the top down and from the bottom up. So gone are the days where a CEO or a board of directors can hire a CIO or a chief security officer and say that's their job, it's their responsibility to protect our business. That's the old school way of thinking. Now it's got to be everybody's job, and everybody's got to wear that hat, right? So from CEO and board of directors all the way down, they have to have that education, that knowledge, and that at least at a strategic level, what it means to be cyber aware, to have a preparedness plan, because everybody is going to get hit. That's not a question. It's how you respond that is going to protect your shareholders, your customers, your staff, and that's something that's starting to become broad knowledge across the Australian industry.
Is this what you're seeing too, Richard?
Over the last 5 years, we've seen CEOs and boards be substantially concerned and worried about cyber. Mm-hmm. We haven't actually seen that translate into a significant uplift in investment or a change in approach. Mohan is right. So over 80% of cyber attacks have a human factor involved. So it's a person clicking on a link or opening an attachment or doing the wrong thing. But we also know we're spending over $10 billion globally on education and awareness. So there's just this disconnect between the level of worry or risk at boards, the investment, and whether or not the education of our employees is actually effective at stopping cyber attacks.
So you're suggesting perhaps Australian businesses aren't nearly as prepared as they should be?
I think there's enough empirical evidence to support that. Why are cyber attacks increasing in terms of frequency and the impact that they're having? So to me, it suggests we're not winning the war on cybercrime, and it says that the bad guys are operating a little bit faster and more effective than us. We have seen a shift in the last 2 years, so there's definitely an increase in budget. We know boards and CEOs are taking it more seriously, but we're yet to see that translate into the right investments to make this harder for the bad guys.
I mean, because it's not only about having a cyber plan, it's about having an up-to-date cyber plan, and that's what you're saying, just can't keep up.
Yeah, you can't keep up, but it's also super complex. If you think about the digital ecosystem, and to Mohan's point, the supply chain of an organisation, it's extremely complex, whether that's IoT devices, multiple cloud providers, edge computing capability. To protect all that is difficult, and all the bad guys have to do is find one way in, the weakest link, which might be an employee doing the wrong thing or a vulnerability that you haven't patched on a system you didn't even know about. So it is a hard challenge, but we're starting to see, I guess, the industry talk more and more about how do we collaborate together to tackle this, almost in a kind of connected defence kind of mindset rather than compete where we may on traditional grounds.
Now, the government has introduced a new legislation for critical infrastructure this year. What were the drivers for this, and how are organisations preparing for the changes?
Yeah, I'd say there were two main drivers. So we saw through the pandemic and through an increasing rate of climate-driven emergencies, many organisations have impacts to supply chains or physical sites or assets. But we've also seen an increase in cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure around the nation. So over 25% of cyber attacks that is happening at Australia are targeting whether it's the grid or water or retail or things that we rely on. And so the Australian government has introduced some legislation to make companies do two things: increase their cybersecurity maturity, but also focus on an all hazards approach so that we can react and respond to natural disasters or cyber attacks in a way that doesn't interrupt critical infrastructure or disrupt essential services.
Mohan, what do you think of this legislation?
I think it's a very important step forward, actually, Amber. And one thing that is for sure, looking at countries like the US and the UK and how they've approached the situation, we are actually making big strides here in Australia based around these types of policy shifts and changes that Australian government is introducing, and now we need to push that out. And as Richard said earlier, I think the issue of cybersecurity is now front of mind for most large organisations, at least across Australia, but it hasn't translated to the budgetary spend allocation and mandates and new legislation like the critical infrastructure bill that's been passed are instrumental in driving that change and forcing organisations to make those investments.
So would you agree with Richard perhaps that Australian companies aren't up to date with their cyber plans and they need to work faster?
Definitely, and that's not just Australian organisations, that's the world over. We're all behind the eight ball. Let's face the facts. And part of the reason for that is the bad guys are so good at collaborating. They share everything. They share ideas, they share tactics, they even share intellectual property for the bugs that they create. We're not good at doing that on the good side, and we need to get better. And that's why, down here we started the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre, which is all about bringing that collaboration together. And government can start that flywheel going. And I think over the last several years, Australian government has done a good job of helping us get to the front edge. But government can only do so much. It needs to be an enabler, but then industry needs to kick in and take over. And I think that's the impetus. If we can leave something in people's mind today, it's time to take action now.
So when you look forward at the next 5 years, what concerns do you have in terms of trends from cyber attackers?
Well, from my perspective, it's the sophistication, right? The rate of change and the rate of sophistication is really quick, and keeping up with that is a constant day-to-day challenge. And as we're bringing new talent into the industry to be able to tackle this stuff, we need to be able to get them to, get up to speed really quickly and evolve really quickly in their thinking. So, we can't be training cyber warriors with technology and approaches that are 3 years old. That's outdated already. We need to be thinking in real time. We need to be thinking agile in the way that we approach, both training and hands-on work.
Richard, I'll bring you in too. Looking ahead for the next 5 years, what are you seeing as the major challenges?
Yeah, I've probably got two big concerns. We know the global economic outlook isn't favourable, and we know there's already substantial pressure on supply chains around the world. So the cybercriminals know this as well, and they will be targeting to disrupt supply chains of critical infrastructure. And they do this because they know they're likely to get a ransom paid. So we're seeing ransom amounts, whether it be 5 million, 20 million, 40 million, actually be paid. So it's fueling the industry. So that's my first concern. The second concern I've got is this concept of cyber meets physical. So we know the world is so interconnected now that we're going to have what we might call a kinetic impact or a physical impact from a cyber attack. And so I've got significant concerns of what that means for safety and well-being of people and employees, or the kind of catastrophic impact that could come from a cyber attack, which we're seeing trends towards, but we've yet to see anything substantial.
So how exposed is Australia to this in terms of critical infrastructure?
I mean, if you look at our economy, I'd say it's fairly evident it's quite exposed. We're very resource intensive. We've seen all the kind of concern around our grid and energy production recently. That the reality is that we've got substantial technical debt across quite complex digital ecosystems that makes it hard to protect. And so I think the concern is real for Australia. I think the government has acknowledged that. This legislation is looking to kind of uplift and protect the resilience of the nation, which at the end of the day is to protect all of us so that we still have the essential services that we need. But it is of concern, and I think we need to see a bit of a step change in the investment levels to match the concerns that boards and CEOs have. One interesting change from this legislation is the 11 sort of industries that are caught up in this legislative change, their directors will have to sign off an annual attestation around the effectiveness of their security risk management program. So we're trying to drive more board accountability around managing this risk for their organisations and helping protect the nation.
Mohan, would you agree with Richard that Australian companies are fairly exposed in terms of critical infrastructure?
Definitely, and some of those 11 are more exposed than others. You know, obviously, you know, our banks have always kind of invested pretty heavily in cybersecurity, but some other critical infrastructure entities, you know, even in the utility spaces, are quite far behind and really need to accelerate quickly to catch up, not just to meet the requirements of the bill, but in general terms, just basic cyber hygiene for some of these organisations is complex. And even more complex is the case that some of our critical infrastructure is foreign owned. And you know, where there's that foreign ownership of some of our most critical infrastructure, you know, we also have concerns about that and how, you know, other nation states might have access to our systems inherently before a cyber attack even takes place. So there is a lot of complexity. It's not going to be a simple, you know, one-click button and we solve the problem. But definitely, as long as the right level of attention is there, everyone's working together, and the right level of investment is being made in the right areas, and especially in driving net new talent into the industry, then that's our best shot.
What do you think Australian businesses should be doing differently?
Well, for sure, you know, as Richard said, assigning the right levels of budget is just not there for some organisations. Like they have a practice and a history of assigning a certain percentage of revenue to IT spend, and then a percentage of that IT spend to cyber. That's the old way of thinking about it. You know, we need to get to the new age, which is understand what your risk appetite is for the entire business, and then invest according to that risk appetite. And it's going to be slightly different for different organizations, but certainly that level of investment is not there for the risk appetite that these organizations have faced. And there's a job that needs to be done there for, you know, organizations like EY to come in and support those organizations to make that right kind of level set to where our risk appetite is as a business and as an entity, and then aligning our investment with that.
Richard, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree on the investment increase, but I also think it's about making the right choices. So we've seen a lot of spend traditionally be on the prevention and detection. So how do we keep the bad guys out? How do we know when they get in? I actually think we need to shift some of that spend and focus on the response capability and the resilience of an organisation to recover. So you made the comment, it's not a matter of if, but when.
Yeah.
So we know that. So why are we not spending more money on our ability to get back up and operating, or to avoid going down in the first place from a significant ransomware or cyber attack? So I think that's got to be a priority for us. And then secondly, a lot of organisations, and Mohan said that, are still playing catch up. But catch up is no good when the bad guys are moving faster. So there needs to be some thinking across Australian organisations around how do we transform and leapfrog some of the capabilities of the bad guys? What are we going to need in 5 years' time to fight cybercrime, as opposed to trying to play catch up today?
Well, Richard and Mohan, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us. Definitely some food for thought. Now let's hand it over to the Chief Information Security Officer.
My name is Daniel Trelak. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, at Linktree. So I might get a little bit spicy here and tell you that I hope there isn't one. I mean, I could say blockchain security or supply chain issues or quantum cryptography, something like that. But cybersecurity is hard, and it's already an asymmetric problem. Attackers only have to find one thing, and we have to protect against everything. It's also difficult to measure where we're at because we don't know what we don't know. So not all, but most organizations are already struggling with the basics. Things like asset management, like knowing what they have, vulnerability management, finding all the problems, all the holes that attackers might exploit, and patching things quickly enough. And doing it all consistently is really, really hard. So I would say, I hope there isn't a fancy new technology that can fix all that. Well, I'm hoping there is one, but in reality, most new technologies, most new shiny things are a distraction. And what we really need to do is find something that helps us fix the basics. So for me, when I'm looking to buy something, it's usually right problem at the right time. And it's got to be a hard problem, like I said, or it's got to be a really pressing issue. Solving a really niche problem isn't going to help me. And so for an investor looking to invest in a product, you're looking for a product that solves a really big problem that many organizations have. So things that solve the problems that I mentioned earlier, they should be already solved problems, but in reality they aren't. So they should be looking for those kinds of companies.
That's Crisis Control for this week. I'm Amber Sherlock. Thanks for watching.
Crisis Control, brought to you by Zirilio. Cybersecurity experts protecting Australian businesses and organisations so we can all be safer together.